Attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, hi, everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Irene Varley, Director of Education for the Dibble Institute, and today's topic is shifting the field to prioritize relationship education for youth, featuring Dr. Alan Hawkins. Joining me on the webinar is Kathy Guidry, the wizard behind the curtain, who engineers the technical side of things. Hey, Kathy.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone.
I'm glad you're there. And of course, Dr. Alan Hawkins, our presenter, who I will tell more about shortly. Hey, Alan.
Hi, nice to have everyone on board.
Great, glad to have you too. Before we begin though, I'd like to go over some real practical housekeeping information for you. You know that if you're unable to access audio through your computer, you can use your phone and watch the presentation on your computer. And the number and access code for your phone is here on the screen and also on your invitation for the webinar. And when you come in, all attendees are muted. We also invite you to participate in several ways. We will have a poll question for you before we begin. And also, we hope that you will have questions for Alan at the end of the presentation. And I do ask that possibly if you have a question to kind of jot it down on a sheet of paper. And then at the end, when we call for questions, if you would enter into the question box, which is on your control panel. If you would look at that, there's a question right under the webcam, there's a question, and if you click on the arrow, the down arrow, then it will lighten up or bring up the question box. That's where you would enter your questions. To also remind you that this is being recorded and will be archived, and there is the address for it. And we will also be sending you a reminder at the time that the recording is archived. So you can share it with others as well. I guess maybe many of you have already been on a few prior webinars and are familiar with us. But for those of you who are new attendees today, I'd like to give a short background of the Dibble Institute. And on the screen is a picture of Charlie and Helen Dibble. Yes, there is a Mr. Dibble who actually founded our organization. Charlie was an aeronautical engineer who carried his problem-solving skills back to his home community in California in his retirement years. He dedicated his time to working with youth on a volunteer basis. During this time in the late 80s and early 90s, he witnessed the impact of the rising divorce rate and what that impact was having on the youth he served. His question then was, what are we doing to help youth thrive in spite of their negative family experiences? And what research on youth was being conducted at that time? Not finding anything of real substance, Charlie began his quest. He believed that solutions must be backed by valid research. And so eventually, Charlie founded what was then known as the Dibble Fund, which has evolved to present day the Dibble Institute, which is a secular national 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to equipping young people with the skills and knowledge they need to develop healthy romantic relationships now and for their futures. I guess you could say our mantra is, a teen's love life is not neutral to their future success. We feel that Charlie would be amazed at how his quest and dedication to youth so many years ago has so successfully grown with the leadership of Kay Reed, our executive director, and who Charlie personally handpicked to carry on his vision. Conservatively, we estimate over 1.5 million youth have been reached through DIBBLE programs over the last 10 years. Next slide, please, Kathy. This leads us to what the DIBBLE Institute believes in. Well, basically, like I said about Charlie, believing that all solutions need to be research-based, we continue to believe in research, and you'll find that research evident in all of our products, whether it is our curriculum, our professional development, our webinars, and even our training. So it continues in Charlie's vision. Next slide, please. And to follow that research, we believe that stable, healthy, safe families are so important for the future outcome of our youth. And we recognize that families are defined differently today. But what is so important is the stability and health of those families that can create safe, protective environments for our children to thrive. And we know that the research states that children growing up in biological family homes benefit the best. But we do know, that said, we do know that other family formations also, based on stability and healthy relationships, create good outcomes for children. And we know there are wonderful, wonderful outcomes with the work and sacrifice of many families. And then finally, we also believe that all people deserve respect. And so we do not publish or even consider that, well, let me say that we are gender neutral in all of our curriculum, that we offer both in our scenarios and in our slide photos, that we represent all types of sexual orientation and couples. So in that way, we are following Charlie's lead that drives our mission in translating research into learning tools for youth and young adults. Offering this free second Wednesday webinars also aim to meet Charlie's mission. So before I present the Alan to do his presentation and share his knowledge with us, I would like to introduce a poll for you. And this will help us recognize what your work in relationship education has been. So if you would kindly put click on the actual answer to how have you been involved in relationship education in the past, so we get an idea of where you're coming from today. Wow, look at this. Okay, so we have some with couple relationship education, primarily with individually oriented relationship education for youth and young adults. That's the highest super. And the least amount was some other kind of relationship education, both of the above and none of the above. So I'm thinking none of the above, this might be very new information for you. And I hope you find that to be very helpful for you. Let me now introduce you to our very special presenter today, Dr. Hawkins, who is a Camilla E. Kimball Endowed Professor of Family Life at Brigham Young University in beautiful Provo, Utah. Dr. Hawkins earned his PhD in Human Development and Family Studies at Penn State University in 1990, incidentally, just as Charlie was beginning his search for research. In 2012, Allen received the university's prestigious Carl G. Mazur Research Award. His scholarship and outreach focuses on educational and policy interventions to help couples form and sustain healthy relationships and enduring marriages. In 2003 to 4, he was a visiting scholar with the Federal Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation within the Administration for Children and Families under the Department of Health and Human Services, working on Federal Healthy Marriages Initiative. Currently, he is the co-chair of the Utah Marriage Commission. Because we at Dibble have long appreciated and integrated Dr. Hawkins' research into our own mission, it is an honor to welcome Alan as our presenter today.
Thank you. I mean, appreciate that. Welcome. Looks like we've got, boy, we're getting close to 100 attendees. That's impressive. And I feel honored to be able to do this for Dibble. I've admired the work of the Dibble Institute for some time. But over the last year or two, intellectually, I've been drawn more to that work because of a lot of the research that I've been reading, and a lot of attention, as I think we all know, is in the relationship education field, has been given to committed couples and to married couples. There's a reason why our field is often referred to as couple education or couple and relationship education. Let's go to the next slide there. I do a lot of reading of this research and have synthesized it with meta-analytic studies. My current count is actually we're approaching about 300 evaluation studies of relationship education programs. And I just did a basic count a while back. And more than 85% of those evaluation studies have targeted programs that are serving committed couples. Less than 15% have targeted younger individuals who, and they've targeted individuals, not couples. Now, some of those individuals are in relationships, but the curriculum just targets healthy relationship skills for individuals. Now, there has been an uptick in interest in that over the last decade, and so that's a great sign. But it got me thinking, do we need to reprioritize our efforts? If the research is reflecting what's really going on out there, we are field dominated by couple education rather than individually oriented education, especially targeted to young people. Let's go to the next slide. You know, we do know that our youth are very interested still in having a good marriage. 3/4 of youth say having a good marriage is extremely important to me. 80% of young adults say it's important to me to be married someday. And the research doesn't show a lot of variation in those statistics by race or class. It seems to be pretty universal aspirations, but are those aspirations alone enough for youth to arrive safely at those marital destinations? I think we all understand that there are some big barriers and maybe lengthy and dangerous detours to those destinations. And for that reason, I have myself thinking that we need to give more attention to individually oriented relationship education for youth. Now, I'm certainly not the only scholar out there who's kind of seen the light this way. Galena Rhodes and Scott Stanley, very important figures in our field, said that intervening earlier in relationship development before individuals are committed or perhaps even partnered has the potential to have an even greater impact on improving relationship quality than our interventions for couples already committed to marriage. Ben Carney, an important researcher at UCLA, has said that adolescent romantic relationships are a key period during which the foundations of healthy adult marriages may be strengthened. I think sometimes we get the sense that adolescent romantic relationships are a whole nother planet that are not really connected at all to later relationships and particularly to marriages. But adolescents are learning a lot of very important things about relationships and relationship skills, or not learning, or getting into bad habits. It is an important foundation, and we need to reconnect it to these later aspirations of marriage. Next slide, please. Christian Smith is a sociologist at University of Notre Dame. And he complains that we're failing to equip our youth with the ideas, tools, and practices to know how to negotiate their romantic and sexual lives in healthy, non-destructive ways that prepare them to achieve the happy, functional marriages and families that most of them say they want in future years. What Smith was saying is that for whatever reasons in our society, we have basically taken a hands-off approach to helping youth go from their younger years to their adult years when they are forming and sustaining healthy marriages. We basically said, you're on your own. And that's his complaint, is that as family, as communities, as a society, we need to do a better job to help people understand, help youth understand what is a healthy relationship. How do we form it? How do we maintain it? This laissez-faire approach, he thinks, does not work. And maybe just a few more quotes here, a few more voices. Mark Regnerus at the University of Texas at Austin says, there's little effort from any institutional source aimed at helping emerging adults consider how their present social, romantic, and sexual experiences shape or war against their vision of marriage. And then finally, Frank Fincham, who's a very noted social psychologist, claims that relationships should be the fourth R in school, after or with reading, writing, and arithmetic. He thinks there's a very noble place, an important place within our educational system for learning these soft skills that are crucial not only in romantic relationships, but in the workplace as well. And my final one, this is actually just a very recent Richard Weiss at Harvard University, released a very interesting report. And he's found that a large majority of our young people reported that they wish they had received more information and help from their parents about some emotional aspect of a romantic relationship. And 2/3 of them are saying that they, wishing that they had received guidance on romantic relationships within school, for instance, within a health class or a sex education class. Certainly one of the strong voices out there is the Dibble Institute, talking about how we need to integrate relationship education with sex education to make them more effective. Okay, well, let's go to the next slide. So here's my basic kind of bottom line point that I think I'm trying to make. Once couples commit to a permanent union and marriages form, it's still important to support those relationships. So please don't read this as a tirade against couple education. That is not at all the case. But I'm beginning to think, from all the research that I've been reading, that there may be only so much that can be achieved when marriages are formed on weaker foundations, and too many marriages are beginning at lower levels of marital quality and on weaker foundations. This suggests that we need to be doing more to help our young people get to this place where they can really form a stronger, healthy, committed relationship on a long-term, healthy marriage. And what this does is it gets us really back to the roots of the relationship education field in prevention, so that we're helping people get off to a better start rather than trying to remediate the problems that they have. Now, saying that, I do want to acknowledge the reality that we know from research over the past decade that pretty healthy proportions of couples who attend relationship education report that they're in substantial distress. And so when it may be that couple education is better thought of as intervention. On the preventative side, perhaps if we are working with our youth to help them avoid the pitfalls of problematic relationship formation, find and follow those safer behavioral paths to healthy and stable marriages. Or very important, I think, is to learn those those warning signs and to be able to end those high-risk relationships before marriage and before parenting. I think youth relationship education then is much more consistent with this notion of prevention, which is at the heart of the relationship education field. So I'm going to make 4 arguments, and I'm going to be kind of academic now, trying to weave together kind of 4 lines of research that I've been following over the last little while that makes the argument that, 1, there are a lot of potholes in teen romantic relationships. And so people can start getting into trouble and getting into bad habits early on. There are problematic paths and dangerous detours en route to our marital destinations. And so I'll kind of detail what we know about that way. Also, and I think sometimes this does surprise people, more and more we are seeing marriages get started at a fairly low to modest level of marital quality and satisfaction. A little bit puzzling, but I'll talk some more about that challenge. And then I want to talk just briefly about how hard it is to do repair work. If people come to to their marriages with problems, that wouldn't be as much of a problem if they were forthcoming in getting help and if it was pretty easy to help repair relationships. But it is not that way. All right, so let me put on my professorial hat here and talk about what the research is saying. Number 1, we know that there are problems in youth romantic relationships. Now, by the age of 18, about 2/3 of adolescents have been in a romantic relationship. By the way, we have a tendency to think about these relationships as being brief and tentative. Most of them have experienced a relationship that has lasted more than a year, and they are really very serious about their relationship. However, there are problems. We know that 30 to 40% of young adult romantic relationships report that there has been some kind of relationship violence in that relationship. And that's, when I talk to my students about this, their jaws drop. Coming maybe from a more privileged background, perhaps maybe they haven't been exposed to this. I don't know, but they seem quite surprised by that. But we do see relationship violence beginning early, before young people, I think, have figured out that those things are not helpful, and before that frontal cortex kicks in and helps them understand that these things are not constructive for a relationship. Now, we also know that youth are experiencing a number of relationships. They are delaying marriage until their late 20s on average now. But they are not delaying sex, they're not delaying living together, and perhaps most importantly, many are not delaying parenthood. And so these relationship issues and relationship formation issues can actually become very challenging as they build either positive or negative trajectories towards their aspiration of marriage. Okay, so there are problems in these youth relationships. There are also some very strong and positive ones. But because of delayed marriage and the relationships that are forming, especially during the 20s, we see some problematic paths that are emerging here. One of them that you're probably quite aware of is we see a lot of churning or cycling in these youth and young adult relationships. Now, by that I mean that these are relationships that are breaking up and getting back together and breaking up again and getting back together. We may just smile at this and say, oh, those are young people, they're just kind of immature. But what we are beginning to see now from research is that this kind of relationship churning or cycling is a pretty strong factor related to higher risk of abuse later in relationships, poorer relationship quality. It's a danger sign that they should be aware of. Also a danger to healthy relationship formation, and particularly stable and healthy marriages, is early initiation of sex in a relationship. Good research now showing that for many couples, sex is initiated within the first week or two of a relationship, and may serve as a way to delay in other important ways of learning about each other, and kind of putting in the relationship into another gear before we have a lot of other kinds of information about our partner that are really important. And we also see this contributing to what Scott Stanley and others have called kind of sliding through key relationship transitions, particularly moving in together. Just kind of, you know, the momentum's taking them in that direction, and they make these kinds of, they initiate these transitions without fully thinking about what it may mean, and actually find themselves in situations where it may be more difficult for them to end a relationship, even with some of its unhealthy or unsatisfying aspects. And a lot of research is finding that premarital cohabitation is a risk factor for healthy and stable marriages. Although we're learning more and more about that, and there seem to be particular things. It's premarital cohabitation before commitment to the future. Those who are engaged, who have a strong commitment to that future, and who are living together do not seem to experience that same risk. But especially for those who cohabit with a number of different partners and without that clear commitment to the future, and then also those who are having children before marriage, those tend to be quite high risk factors for those healthy and stable marriages that young people aspire to. So let's go to the next slide. And again, here's one that I find my students quite surprised at when I talk to them about this, but a lot of marriages are starting at fairly low qualities these days. Half of husbands and a third of wives reported significant doubts about marrying prior to marriage. You put those two things together, and in 2 out of 3 marriages, one or both spouses had doubts. Now, some of those doubts I think may be more not about their relationship so much, but they've seen a lot of divorce, or they just hear that marriages are unstable, and you know, are kind of more of those cultural things. But I'm sure that some of it is related specifically to their relationship, and not so sure that it's going to work out. And we know that when they bring doubts into the marriage, it is associated with lower quality to begin the relationship and a higher risk for divorce. So many are starting out these marriages at low to moderate levels of satisfaction. Another interesting line of research now is looking backwards from couples who have divorced. And with research that has followed these couples for many years before the divorce, sometimes even from the time that they married. And it's interesting, more and more we are tracing divorces back to couples who began their marriage with problems. Those problems have been there all along. The scenario of a relationship being pretty good and pretty strong and then something happening and the bottom falling out is actually a pretty small proportion of cases of eventual divorce. The much more common scenario is starting out with problems and at lower levels of quality, and then over time not being able to fix those, and those issues accumulating until it feels like the marriage is no longer worth it, and a divorce occurs. So again, this is another reason I think why we need to attend to youth relationship education before these couples are forming. Now, as I said, it would be another thing if there were these problems and people readily sought help, and it was pretty straightforward to help them. But that's not the case. First of all, distressed couples usually do not seek help before they divorce. And when they do, it's usually after a crisis point. This is what marriage therapists complain about incessantly, is that they don't get people until there's been this crisis, and then they're in trauma mode, and it's much more difficult to work with them to kind of to work on the specific problems and issues rather than to kind of just deal with the trauma at hand. Among those who are thinking about divorce, I've learned from some research that I've done that seeking out formal help isn't very common. Only about 25% report that they have sought out some counseling. Some, although not as many as you might think, talk with a religious leader. A few, not as many as we wish, will take a couple relationship education class. Now, that doesn't add up to 50%. The reality is, we know that when people are seeking help, when they're thinking about divorce, they often do multiple things. They do many of these kinds of things. And so we think it's really probably less than a third of couples that are individuals who are thinking about divorce who will seek out some kind of formal help. Now, it's too bad, because the research is clear. Couple counseling can be very successful, especially when both partners are fully engaged and when they come before a crisis point. So we want them to seek help. All I'm doing is I'm just pointing out that many do not seek it, and when they do, they often seek it at a time when it's much more difficult to help them. And even when we can help them in the short run, we have to acknowledge that therapy has a pretty significant relapse rate over time. It doesn't always stick. And so it's just hard to repair those potholes and smooth out the journeys for them. It is much better if we can prevent those problems in the first place. Well, so that's kind of my academic review of what makes me think that we need to put more priority and to reprioritize individually oriented relationship education for youth and prioritize it over couple education. But having made that argument, I decided that I need to take a look. What does the early evidence show about relationship education for youth and young adults? And so I was able, with some help from some talented graduate students, to combine or to collect all the studies that have been done of these kinds of programs and see what their effects were. So we found about 30 programs, 30 studies of programs that targeted youth and young adults and provided individually oriented relationship literacy education. A little more than half of those were control group studies, but about half were just treatment group studies with just one treatment group measured before and after a program intervention. What we found was that there were modest effect sizes. We were finding evidence that these programs are making some positive changes in these young people's lives. Improved knowledge about healthy relationships. Now, that's just knowledge, it's not behavioral skills, but I don't want to downplay that. I think we strongly overestimate how much knowledge young people have about healthy relationships and healthy relationship skills. So I think improving the knowledge base is very important. But we also see evidence in the research that we are improving their relationship skills, interaction and communication skills, that kind of thing. We decrease their faulty relationship beliefs. Love conquers all, would be one of those primary ones. But people often believe things about relationships that are not helpful, and we can change there. We can improve their knowledge levels. We also find really heartening research that documents increased disapproval of relationship aggression, and we know that levels of aggression are pretty high in those relationships. So this is important. And at least one or two studies, actually connecting relationship education for youth to a reduced pregnancy risk. However, even though we're seeing early positive evidence, there's a big but here, and that is we do not yet have a really rigorous long-term follow-up study of how relationship education affects long-term relationship formation behavior. And this is a real need in the field. Probably a randomized controlled trial study, one that probably targets multiple sites as well. This is very hard research to do, very expensive. The Administration for Children and Families has funded some very rigorous, very large and important studies of couple education for unmarried couples with children who want a future together, and with married couples with children. And they funded this work and targeted more disadvantaged groups for these programs. The findings of those programs have been somewhat mixed and not as strong as we would have hoped. But to do the kind of study I think that needs to be done for these individually oriented relationship education programs, I think we may need help of a major funding organization like the Administration for Children and Families. We do have evidence that these programs are working, but we need a really strong long-term study that follows these youth over about a decade now, when they are marrying, to see if it is really making a difference down the road. That's a crucial need in the field. All right, let's go to the last couple of slides, and then we'll wrap up here and maybe have time for some questions. First of all, I want to make it clear I'm not coming out against couple education, and in particularly, I still think there is an important role for premarital education. Still, a minority of couples invest in formal marriage preparation education, and some of the programs that they invest in, I don't know that they are of the highest quality anyway. And yet we have good research, more than 50 studies that suggest that premarital education can make a difference, at least in the early years, in the high-risk years of marriage. And so I think we need more of it. One thing we also have learned is that those who participate in premarital education are much more likely to seek out marital counseling and to seek it out earlier when problems arise. And I think that's a good sign as well. Now, I do think that we're going to have to update our curricula and make it relevant for the 21st century and relationship formation challenges that are out there. But I think that's very doable. I do think there's a strong need for premarital education, couple education as well. Matter of fact, I'm about to conclude I'm kind of writing a paper on that now, but maybe the need has never been greater for this, and I'm trying to construct an argument for that. All right, so I still think there is a need for that. But let's just talk then. So what? What does this mean? Well, what it really means to me is that as a field, we need to give much greater priority to relationship education for youth and young adults. Maybe even to flip the field, so that the large majority of work is going on in that area, and that couple education is a little more minor appendage to that. That's maybe a little bit radical to say, but I do think we will end up in a better place if we kind of flip the field that way. How do we do that? Well, first of all, I want to call on parents. Richard Weisbord's research says that children want to hear from their parents about relationships. And I think there could be a real value in the field to have a curriculum that parents themselves can use to help their youth understand what healthy relationships are and healthy relationship formation patterns and danger signs. I think parents can be a first guard there. I think religious organizations could step up as well, and help and particularly integrate important religious principles to help youth understand how we form and sustain healthy relationships. I also believe that schools can do more. There is a lot that is going on in the schools, but I don't think it's enough yet. And I think we can do much better. As Frank Mitchum would say, we can make it the fourth R. Relationships can be the fourth R in our school curricula. There are a number of positive youth development programs there. It's a big and a growing area of our field. But not many of them include very explicit messages about healthy relationship development. I think positive youth development programming can step up here and help. I think colleges, 2-year and 4-year colleges, maybe especially 2-year colleges, could do a lot. The classes that are out there, I know, are heavily subscribed. There's not an empty seat in the classroom. The kids are hungry for these messages. And so I think there's a real need for the professoriate, especially I think in those 2-year colleges, to step up and help youth learn these principles of healthy relationship formation. And as I mentioned just a second ago, researchers need to step up as well. We need these large-scale, rigorous evaluation studies to get more confidence that the work that we do in these relationship education programs for youth can really make a difference in their lives. Well, that's all that I've got, and I appreciate everyone's attention. I do have here in this last slide a link to this article that's online. I don't think it's actually out in print yet. Will be out soon. But if you want to read a more formal treatment of these things, here's an article that I did that kind of summarizes a lot of what I've presented here. With that, Irene, do you want to take over and see what the questions are?
Sure. If you could put your questions into the question box, I'd appreciate it. That being said, there is one comment that is from Jonine McKenzie from the Center for Relationship Education, who has to comment that she knows of 14 schools in Colorado that are currently doing an RCT study right now. So that sounds very hopeful.
Oh, Janine, I'd like to get more information about that. That's yeah, that sounds very positive. So, Janine, I hope Janine would send me more information about that.
And there were 2 comments much earlier in your presentation that 2 individuals posted, but in my enthusiasm, I ended up deleting them when I clicked on them. So if you made a comment very early in the presentation, if you would put them back on again, I'd appreciate it. But Karen Hendry is asking that you put up the last slide again. She'd like to see that. I think she wants to copy that address down. Yes. And Rhonda, yes, these slides will be available as well. Kathy, isn't that correct, as my understanding? Kathy, can
Unmuted.
I'm sorry, I had muted myself.
yeah.
Yes, I will begin putting the presentation up on YouTube, and I will have the PDF also put by the archive recording, and it should be done by Monday afternoon at the latest.
hmm And thanks, Kathy. And Rhonda also mentions, and I wholeheartedly believe this because I'm astounded at how little sexuality education exists across the country. And when I talk to teachers and visit different locations, um, and it needs to start earlier than we have that. Do you have any comments about that, Alan?
Oh, well, I will agree with you. I understand why schools shy away from it.
Mm-hmm.
It's difficult, but we've got to do difficult things. I think there's a process that schools can go through um, that that can make this more possible. Um, uh, because the need is there. You're right. It's earlier. It can be highly political, and I think it has to be done with incredible sensitivity. More important, the most important thing is I think we need to develop really skilled, effective teachers, and I think that maybe there's a lot more training that needs to go on for these in-school sex education program teachers to help them be able to do this well. But it's going to be hard. I understand why they're not doing it, but I am one who agrees with you that we've got to work together and overcome those barriers and make this available for students who want it. I'm not one, I'm very cautious about insisting, requiring that all students do it. I think there are some real issues and real concerns there. And I think some school districts have actually gotten themselves in trouble by insisting and not allowing students to opt out. But I do think there is a real strong need for that. And I strongly argue that we've got to embed sex education in a broader context of relationship education. Just teaching body parts and plumbing isn't going to get it done.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And that's what we really aim to do in our curriculum is to place the context of sex within the relationship and to get it to a healthier consideration for our youth.
Right.
I don't have another question for our participants, but I do have a question myself and was wondering if you can, in looking at those programs that you have studied in that, you allude to in that last slide, what are some essential components for effective relationship education for youth?
First of all, I think the number one thing I would say is you want youth to understand what a healthy relationship looks like, and using all the effective teaching tools that we know of to help them understand what a healthy relationship looks like. We overestimate how much our youth know that way. For some youth, they've hardly ever seen a healthy romantic relationship in their world. For others, where our youth are so enmeshed in in a media culture, and incredibly, there can be incredibly powerful messages out there about relationships, and a lot of them can be unhealthy, can be showing, not showing a healthy relationship, or can be telling them things that are wrong. And so I just think that's the first step, is making sure kids understand, what a healthy relationship looks like. And what are the rules? And I'll go ahead and use that word too. What are the rules for forming and maintaining a healthy relationship? And because there's some basic, straightforward things, and they work across cultures. So that's my number one thing. Then I am also a strong proponent that we teach them some of the really, really basic soft skills that are out there. How to listen. That's not a natural skill. How to listen. How to be clear in our own communication. And particularly in the context of a romantic relationship where there's a lot of other things going on and a lot of emotions involved, how can we have, clear, healthy, constructive discussions and with each other, and be open and honest with each other. So to me, those are fundamental. Those are foundational. I think, if I were going to add a third element, I would make sure as well that youth and young adults understand the pitfalls that are out there around relationship aggression, risks around early sexual initiation and cohabitation, and those kinds of things. There are things that they should know about that are going to be fundamental to their achieving their long-term aspirations. And we as a society should want them to know about them just as much as we'd want them to know how to succeed in the workforce. So those would be, I guess, the three things that I would highlight the most.
Mm-hmm. And I'm really curious for this one because it's been a while since I've been involved in any marriage prep programming. And I would love to know some adaptations that you would suggest to bring that to the 21st century.
Yeah. Preview some of my thoughts that I'm working on in this paper. Well, what we do know is that relationship formation prior to marriage is quite different than it was 40 years ago when I got married. So most couples have been living together. Now I think we're approaching 70%. And so I think we've got to tackle that issue directly. We do know that a lot of people are transitioning to marriage without clear commitment to the future. They're kind of going there because that's where the momentum is taking them. So there's one thing that I think premarital education for the 21st century ought to deal with up front. Is how did you get to this place? What was the process? How did you decide? And are you sure that you've followed kind of the right decision-making process? So in essence, it's actually kind of slowing them down a little bit and making sure that they've gone through a process of thinking and committing, rather than just kind of saying, well, I think this is really the next step. I think that's going to be a harder task than some of the other things that we've done in premarital education, like teaching them effective communication skills and time out and that kind of thing. I also think we have to deal, related to that, I think we have to deal explicitly with the issue of commitment. What does commitment mean? What does it mean for me to choose you and to forsake others, as we often say in our marital vows, to forsaking all others? What does that mean in a social media world? And who can I still be in contact with? And what does loyalty mean? And we kind of have gone through a youth and adolescence where there's a sort of phobia towards commitment. And how do you make that shift that says, okay, I am forsaking all others, and and I am fully 100% invested in you and in this relationship, because I think there are some of those we can't assume that now. And there are things that we can do to work on that dedication to our relationship and our commitment to it. And I think that's a kind of a new part, maybe that we wouldn't have been thought about so much 40 years ago. So those are just, I think, a couple of the things. I've got a longer list, but I think our time is short.
Well, Yeah, and I heard from those one of the persons that I had erased their comment, and one of their question was, is this is from Ellen, and she asked, on your early in your presentation on statistics referencing 75% of teens want a good marriage. She wondered what geographic area were these taken from? Is this from Utah?
No, these are national data. It's U.S. data, but these are national data, and again, not a lot of variation by race, by class. It's pretty universal. Now, there are differences in, if you will, kind of levels of hope or expectation across race and class. There are some who have much more concerns that they'll be able to get to that destination that they seek. But it is pretty universal aspiration that they want to go there.
And in what I have seen too, it seems to be consistent over the years that those
Yeah.
percentages remain consistent.
Yeah,
Well,
if I'm remembering correctly, one study was looking at it, I think since 1975,
yeah,
and
right.
it hasn't really
Exactly.
changed all that much.
Yeah. Mm-mm.
And some people are predicting that this new generation will kind of find marriage to be obsolete, but I'm not putting any money down on that bet. I think marriage still remains the ideal, and I would be surprised to see those numbers drop much.
Well, and here is another one that was erased. And she was wondering if you think that the culture of dating nowadays and lessening of the taboo of divorce has anything to do with the divorce rate or the rate of people who leave relationships in which they are unhappy. As in, do you think more people are getting divorced because it's less taboo today?
Oh, sure. I mean, we are cultural creatures, and the cultural currents we go along with them, and the fact that as other scholars have said, we're in love with marriage, but we're also really very open to divorce. The polls say that the vast majority of people would say that you should only divorce, you should only divorce in extreme circumstances. And yet what we define as extreme circumstances is pretty wide in our society. So we are a marrying and divorcing society. So those cultural currents that make divorce acceptable, yes, make it a kind of a lower bar. I've done research on just thinking about divorce, what I call divorce ideation, and at any one time, you've got 25% of married people who have had some recent thoughts about divorce. I don't think and many of them are actually fairly happy in their relationship. The reality is because we've got that in our culture. And we've got this sort of specter of divorce in our culture, that it's always out there and we can't not think about it because it's just there. It's in the air that we breathe.
Well, I am afraid we're running out of time. I have one positive comment from Tim Kordick in California. Hi, Tim. Good to hear from you. And he mentions that in California, the Healthy Youth Act implemented in 2016 requires emphasizing healthy relationships and sexual health education, which is concentrated in the compliant curriculum. So I think that is a step forward there too.
Yeah.
And if we haven't covered your comments or questions, we will directly address those personally, so you will not feel abandoned today. Thank you so much for all of you who have attended today. And we want to, Kathy, do you have for next month what we have on tap for next month?
Yes, we're actually going to do, it will be the holiday time. So we are not going to be doing a live webinar, but we have a great, and I've listened to this podcast as well, from Freakonomics Radio. It's called the fracking boom. I'm sorry, I had to move my little box here. The fracking boom, a baby boom, and can you read I can't read the rest of it. I'm sorry.
And the retreat from marriage.
Right.
So kind of a lot of what we just talked about.
Well, and it's very interesting because what it does is bring some external issues into looking at why, what's happening in marriages. So anyway, yeah, definitely. And you all will get an invite on that, so you know the link to click on. So
yeah, I will really look forward to that. I think Melissa Kearney's work is really important there.
Yeah, it's an excellent podcast.
Alan, thank you so very much for a very comprehensive approach to the need for youth relationship education. And I hope others have also benefited from hearing that. And we will be addressing those unanswered questions as well. So thank you, Alan, and thank you all. We look forward to hearing from you again. And please know that you can contact us at any time with your questions about anything regarding to youth education, relationship education. Thanks so much. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, Alan.